Alrighty. Without giving you an oral history of what the Pistons season has been like, because honestly, my videos pretty much serve as that, and at this point, you all know. Really, all that matters is, as of this recording, the Pistons have lost 23 consecutive games. It has been communicated to the fans that the Pistons are looking at the trade market, that the next time we hear from the Pistons, from Woj, it's likely going to be, hey, they just went and got a guy that they hope can at least steer this thing back in the right direction. We're punting on this season. Honestly, it's over. Like, it's over. Most of the fans are on board with just losing the rest of the games just to make a point, right? So I think at this point, nobody is focused on going and getting a guy that gets us to the play-in. It's fine. Like, just make sure that by the end of the year, we've won like 18 games. At this point, you would be finishing pretty fucking strong if the Pistons finished with 18 wins, right? And over the last few weeks, but more specifically the last few days, as these reports have come out, people throwing around some names. You know, the early names that we were talking about this season were like Zach LaVine. I even made a video about it where I was in favor of it. But that's the interesting thing about time. Sometimes your brain just goes, you develop a new wrinkle. Some chemicals fuse together and they spark, and you get new ideas. Because when time passes, your fucking ideas are allowed to change. Your opinions are allowed to change if you learn new information. Or if you just, the vibes just feel different. The vibes feel different. I agree with the people who were saying, 2 weeks ago that if you do the Zach LaVine thing, it just feels like the Blake Griffin thing again. You're just getting a guy who's a little bit younger and like not as. Zach LaVine does kind of get hurt, but it just not really on the same level as Blake, it doesn't feel like, right? And then what's going to happen when he gets here? He's going to eat a ton of shots, and even if they go in, people are going to hate him. Even if those shots go in, people are going to hate him because he's going to be taking away from, like, unless it's like Cade setting him up, which I just don't really imagine that's what the relationship would be like between him and Cade. Oh, Nick, are you just assuming that Cade wouldn't have to be in the... Yes. Cade is not getting dealt in that deal. Maybe that's important to note here, too. I don't think the Pistons have any untouchables on the team, but the closest thing to that would be Cade. Like, you're always going to reserve the, well, what if you could do Cade for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? Well, we can't do that anymore, but people were talking about that a few years ago, right? Like trading the number one pick, which would have turned into Cade. If that picked up in your ear, that was my computer, by the way. Sorry about that. A few years ago, we were talking about the number one pick for, like, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Yeah, you couldn't get away with that now. But if there's always something that could be out there that, hey, Cade could be on the table. But again, for all intents and purposes, he's not on the list. That means that it would have to be Ivy that's involved in something here. Anything. Like, across the board, he just would. And there are a few things to that. But I think the most annoying one is that you would have to cash in on that chip as early as you do. If you really, really, really want to go get a guy who can turn things around here or help turn things around, you're going to have to put a guy like Jaden Ivey on the table. There's a world where you have to put a guy like Isaiah Stewart. It could be Jalen Duren. It's no shortage of guys. Nobody on this team is safe. And that part of it sucks. But you really got to sweeten the pot with this thing. And I still don't even think we can do that with first-round picks, is the other part of this that makes it so difficult. And I've had, back on the Bone and Cardigan show, I asked James to explain this to me all the fucking time. And I still don't get it. I'm sure some of you guys do get what I'm about to talk about, and you're going to try to tell me about it. I'm going to read it, and it's just not going to make sense. The Pistons can't trade a first-round pick for, like, a while because we owe the Rockets one, or the Knicks. I think it's the Rockets. We owe Houston a pick that hasn't conveyed for, like, 3 years. Like, we've been doing this dance for, like, 3 years. And until that pick that we owe them conveys, we can't move one? Again, I don't understand the fucking limitations of the CBA. The trade machine has never explained this to me. I've had people explain to me, and I don't get it. So for all intents and purposes, we're going to be moving throughout this segment assuming, okay, we can trade Jaden Ivey, but we can't trade first-round picks. I think we're just going to have to scrap that. I think we're just going to have to say Troy and his fiscal savviness, his trade savviness, he can figure something out. So what I want to do today is talk about 3 players that I want the Pistons to look at that I think would be amazing if they traded for. While I wrote them down, I realized I did kind of go in ascending order. So I guess it is kind of like a dream scenario, plan B, or like, I guess if all else fails, do this thing, is how I'm going to read them off. So it's going to be 3 players, and then from those 3 players, 3 stats that I like about those players and how the context of it fits in with Detroit. So for starters, this is like a dream scenario for the Detroit Pistons if they go and try and make a trade this year, which they will. Lauri Markkanen. Now, no shocks here. Kind of like the prize of the NBA right now, the guy that everybody's trying to go after. You've seen the Lakers thrown around. I think that have the Thunder been thrown around at all? If they have, it hasn't been enough. If they have, it has not been nearly enough. Because if there was ever a time for Sam Presti to look at his, and this is kind of coming to me in real time, was looking at his pile of assets, thinking like, when is going to be the right time? And that's kind of what I've always argued, is that like at some point the picks that you hoard, like there has to be a right time to do something. I don't think there's any time like the present, first of all. What I love the most about Lauri Markkanen, not just this year, last year too, he was an all-star last year, right? For the first time in his career. Can we get a round of applause for a guy breaking out of NBA meme purgatory? Like, the guy's not a joke. The guy is like playing real-life basketball. Game against, well, I don't want to spoil one of the stats, so I don't want to say what I'm about to say. But he's playing meaningful minutes in games that matter against teams that matter, right? Like, deep into these stretches, giving you 38 and 17. 3 years ago, he was a meme on a team that stunk. And we were like, what a waste of a pick. Like, bust, boo, Lauri Markkanen. And now, man, let's talk about these 3 stats that I like. So the first one, last season he shot 6 free throws a game. I've talked about it all year. If the Pistons can't get to the line, they will not win games. And what has happened? They have not gotten to the line at all. There's nobody that can draw a whistle. 6 free throws a game isn't a ton, but honestly, we could use a lot of that around here. Right? Especially at his position, and especially with his size, with his mobility, the way that you would work him and Cade together in like some 2-man shit, going downhill, dude, he would draw like 10 attempts a game. And if he didn't, you would hope that Cade would finally get the whistle. You know how I think Lowry's attempts could also be higher if he was more in control of his limbs? Because when you really watch him go downhill and like try to Euro and then like do a little hook, there's too much movement in his limbs, and it always makes contact look over exaggerated to a point where it's like, okay, he looks like one of the wacky arm waving inflatable tube mans. You know what I mean? So we got to work on that and we can get those attempts up, but until then, it's still a really good number. Second stat that I like from Lauri Markkanen, career high 6 assists per game. Nick, that doesn't seem very high. 6 assists per game does not seem that high. Doesn't seem very impressive to me. It's not. It's not high. That's the beauty. I don't want it to be, because this is a guy who's like, I'm not the setup man. I'm the man you set up. Give me the ball. I'm about to score. I love it. I love a guy who knows his role. You know what the Pistons need more of on this team? A guy who just motherfucking scores, but actually does it. Not just plays with that mentality and then produces none of it. Right? We got a few of those on the team. Lauri Markkanen actually does it. Made an all-star team last year. Did I mention that? Final stat. This is what I almost spoiled earlier. 50 minutes played against Phoenix. Obviously a career high. The game that I was referencing earlier has 38 and 17, playing in real games early in the season that matter. They feel like they have stakes. They have consequences, right? Figuring out the identities of these teams early on. And Lauri Markkanen plays 50 minutes and gives them 38 and 17. Huh? I appreciate any dude who just won't come out of the game. That's cool. That wouldn't be me, but I love it. So that's the dream scenario for Detroit, obviously, right? Utah's going to want too much. I'm crazy to think that this is even in our wheelhouse, right? Do I believe that the Lakers even have enough? Like, no. But Oklahoma City does. If your priority is capital, Oklahoma City does. How much money does he make? Like $25 million? I have no idea how much money Larry Markkinen makes, which is another obstacle for Detroit. Because then, like, we don't have that much money tied up with that many guys. We don't. So that's going to make it really tough. But that's why it's a dream scenario. On to Plan B. Plan B. I want the Detroit Pistons to trade for Kyle Kuzma. I think this is a marriage that has always been meant to happen. I think this idea is rooted in my belief that Isaiah Stewart needs to come off the bench. I think he needs to be the first or second guy off the bench at power forward. I think if you get a guy like Kyle Kuzma, I think he actually fits that modern traditional role of a power forward that we're trying to get Isaiah Stewart to play anyways, right? And I think that with Stu, I think the shit that he brings to the table, if you even want to say that scoring punch, I think it's just going to be more valuable, especially with his size in that second unit. When we talk about Kyle Kuzma, well, why don't we just get into the stats, and that's how we'll talk about him. So 3 stats that I like from Kyle Kuzma. This one's just weird. Shooting splits 47, 37, 71 on back-to-backs in his career. 66 back-to-backs, his splits are 47, 37, and 71. Why is this important? Because it's the best splits of any days of rest like that he has. Off of 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, or on a back-to-back, these are his best splits. That feels weird from Kyle Kuzma. That's a dude who, you want to talk about staying ready, I guess. That's it. Next one. I like to talk about this. If I'm Troy Weaver and I'm trying to, get some evil off of the streets, do some street justice, I'm looking at a guy like Kyle Kuzma who's shooting a career 50% against Detroit in his career. I think it's 16 games. 50% against Detroit. If you bring that just home, a Flintstone, if you just bring him home, you're cleaning crime up off the streets. Then he can't fucking terrorize us anymore. You know what another one I like is? From earlier this year, they played a game against Charlotte. Washington did. They lost by 3. But our boy, Kyle Kuzma, 28, 10, and 9, and he was plus 13. That's a guy who goes out there, he gets his, he makes sure shit doesn't go wrong, at least while he's out there. That's vet shit. That's a good vet right there. He's making sure that I guess because if we're talking about plus minus, I guess in this instance it would technically be selfish. I want that even more, honestly, on my basketball team. That's what I want even more. But then you're just bouncing him around from purgatory to purgatory. Yeah, but it's also his home. I have honestly, I don't know if you could tell. I don't know if it ended up this way on camera. But when I wrote all 3 of these stats down, I was super on board with it. And now that I'm reading them out loud and I realize how not serious they are, I've actually kind of deprogrammed. I've unlearned that this is something that I actually want. But the point that I would stand by is the one that I made at the beginning, which is if you start him and you put Stu on the bench behind him coming off first or second, I just think that fits closer to what Troy wants out of Isaiah anyways. Let's go to the third and final player. The thing that those first 2 players have in common, play the same position. Well, Nick, why would we do that? Because Troy Weaver really likes to. I don't know why we would. It's literally the only reason I put 2 power forwards. Honestly, because I think Larry Markkinen is like a dream scenario for most teams. I would have said the same thing about Keegan Murray, but I got a whole spiel about that we can do later. But why don't we get a little weird? Let's talk about Anthony Simons. You want to talk about if Jaden Ivey is going to be first to go. Well, if it's for Anthony Simons, he's definitely gone, right? I don't know if Portland would really be that interested in anything. Although Portland did do a workout with Jalen Duren. That's got to be crazy, Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey and like stuff for Anthony Simons. What do I like about Anthony Simons? What stats did I write down? He's dealing with I don't remember what his injury was, but he was dealing with something a couple weeks ago. First game back in like 2 weeks. He puts up 27 on 28 shots. That dude was eager to get back out there. 27 on 28 shots. I said earlier, not that long ago, maybe 5 minutes ago, that the Pistons have a lot of guys on the team who play with that scores mentality but can't actually score. They play as the I'm not the setup man, I'm the man you set up mentality. 27 points on 28 shots is kind of that. It's kind of that. But it's Anthony Simons. You know what I mean? Can I zag? Can I give you a stat that I don't like for his second one? 5.6 assists. I'm serious. From Anthony Simons, this is what I want out of you. Literally just shoot the basketball. Do those little cuts that you like to do. That's fine. Cade has great vision. If Killian's still on the team, he's got great vision. He can pass really, really well. Sneaky, Bogdanovich can pass really well, too. Just keep doing that. Do not pass the ball. That's not what I want you here for. Although he's had some like bizarre assist-to-turnover ratio numbers in his career. I don't think he does right now because he's like sneaky turned the ball over a lot in like the 10 games that he's played this year. Which is ironic because you know what he's not doing? When he's playing big minutes, like when you see Anthony Simons playing like 35 minutes, not 35, but like 27 to 30 minutes in his career, he doesn't foul that much. Pretty disciplined on the defensive end. Doesn't get that many steals, though. I thought Kuzma got more steals than he does. That's something that I wanted to mention. Every time I watch the Wizards, or the Lakers, whatever, I remember just always being like, damn, like Kyle Kuzma plays defense. But then the national narrative is just always that he doesn't. So then I'm always just like, I feel like I'm getting tricked because I just don't know if what I'm seeing wrong. But every time, because I just feel like every time I watch, he comes away with like a block and 3 steals. Kyle Kuzma plays defense. I guess he doesn't, though. I guess he doesn't. Those are the players I want the Pistons to trade for. In that particular order, too, by the way. I don't know who it's going to end up being. I do think it's kind of... If it's not a power forward, it's a small forward. It's a wing, 100%. I don't think they're going after a guard. Although, I guess they could if it ended up having to be Jaden that was attached to it. Nick, you didn't mention OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam? No, man, because I guess what I'm confused about is, are the reports true that we've heard about each of them individually that, like, they just won't re-sign wherever they get traded? Like, they just won't? If that's true, then, like, don't risk it, man. If you think you can get him in free agency, get him in free agency. Hey, man, if you get some backdoor handshake agreement, sure, I guess. For either of them, right? If I had to pick, I would... For right now, I would want Siakam, but I know that for the next, 6 years, I would be like, that OG Anunoby is pretty nice. You know what I mean? What about Tobias Harris? Those rumors are wild. Wild. I love Tobias Harris. It's no shade, but if the Pistons 23 game in a row mid-December shakeup, Woj bomb comes through, and we shipped off, whoever and Bogdanovich and what for fucking Tobias Harris, lame. I think what Tobias is doing for Philly is way more important than what he would be doing in Detroit. Honestly, because he fits that team well. He plays an important role for them, and they're playing really good basketball. Daryl Morey, please, I beg of you, I implore you to not do this. Under no circumstances. I don't care what Troy does. Here's a take. I honestly, this segment's running really long, 20 minutes, but look, we might as well just let it ride. It's an NBA segment. Who cares? If I'm Tom, and I know that there's a chance that, hey, and I'm not saying anything because I don't honestly know, but if I'm Tom Gores, I do know this. If it's in the back of my head that if they only win 10 games this year, Troy is gone, do I really want to force him to make a dumb trade? Do I really want to do what I've done for the last however many GMs, at least Stan Van Gundy? I swear he did it for Jeff Bauer, too. Did he do it with Stefanski? I'd have to go back and look, but he probably did one of those types of... Well, no, I don't think he did with Stefanski. But you put a gun to your GM's head and you say, fucking dance. Do something. Do you really want to do that right before firing him, if that's what you plan on doing? Because the truth is, even if you did do that, but let's assume that you didn't, one thing that we love to talk about with Troy Weaver is that he inherited nothing. That he walked into a situation where he had nothing. And in a lot of ways, they're not wrong. Like, if you really wanted to be nitpicky, be like, well, Bruce Brown, he's, yeah, I guess, right? But even in the trade market, what did Bruce Brown get you? Go back and look at that trade. It got us John and Musa, who by the approximation of most was the worst player in the NBA the year before he was. And we got a second-round pick. But it wasn't just any second-round pick. It was the least favorable of 4 that Brooklyn owned. I believe it was from Toronto. So we got the worst player in the NBA and the worst of 4 second-round picks in exchange for Bruce Brown. So, yeah, Bruce Brown, on the surface, you'd think is a good asset. I guess he fucking wasn't at the time. I say all of this just to say, whoever the next GM ends up being, whenever they come along, the situation that they will be inheriting, light years better than what Troy had. And if nothing else, at the risk of, I guess, capping this off with like a thank God for Troy Weaver, getting on my knee, like, you got to give him credit for that. Because that much is true. But Troy, please, don't let Tom pressure you. But if you're going to make the trade, make it awesome.
Beautiful.